You know that moment when someone's audacity is so staggering you almost have to admire it, almost. I was floating in my pool on a Saturday afternoon, cold beer in hand, enjoying the kind of peace you only get after a brutal week at work. The sun was beating down, the water was perfect, and life was good. That's when I heard it, the screech of expensive sneakers on concrete and a voice dripping with entitlement. "Hey, old man, you need to get out. Now." I opened one eye to see a teenager standing at the edge of my pool arms, crossed looking at me like I was the hired help who'd forgotten his place. This kid, maybe 17, designer everything, had the kind of smirk that said he'd never heard the word no in his entire life. "This is HOA property," he announced. "My mom runs this neighborhood, so, unless you want problems, I suggest you leave." I almost laughed. If only this entitled brat knew who he was talking to. Before we dive into how this all went down, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there, and if you love stories about entitled people getting what they deserve, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, won't want to miss how this ends. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this absurd situation. 6 months ago, I moved into Willowbrook Estates, one of those picture-perfect suburban neighborhoods where every lawn is manicured within an inch of its life, and the HOA rules are thicker than a phone book. I'd just been elected to a position that required me to relocate to this county, and this place seemed ideal. Quiet, safe, good property value. What I didn't know was that I was moving into a dictatorship disguised as a homeowners association. My first week there, I met Karen Mitchell. She showed up at my door on day 3 with a basket of muffins and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Karen was the kind of woman who wore her authority like designer jewelry, expensive, obvious, and meant to intimidate. Blonde highlights that cost more than most people's car payments, yoga pants that probably had a 3-figure price tag, and an expression that said she was always looking for someone to correct. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she'd said, her voice sugary, sweet. "I'm Karen, the HOA president. Just wanted to make sure you received your welcome packet with all our community guidelines." I had received it, all 47 pages of it. "I noticed your moving truck blocked the Hendersons' driveway for about 20 minutes yesterday," she continued, that smile never wavering. "Just a friendly reminder that we have very strict parking regulations. I'd hate for you to receive a citation on your first week. A citation for a moving truck that was temporarily parked while unloading my entire life." "I'll keep that in mind," I'd said, keeping my tone neutral. Years in my profession had taught me to read people, and I was reading Karen loud and clear. Control freak, power hungry. The type who needed to establish dominance immediately. What I didn't mention to her, what I didn't mention to anyone, was my actual job. I'd learned early in my career that telling people what I did for a living changed how they acted around me. I wanted to be just another neighbor, not someone people felt they had to perform for. So I kept it vague. Public service, I'd say if anyone asked. County work. Technically true. That decision would turn out to be both my biggest mistake and my greatest advantage. Karen's son Brandon I met about a week later. He was 17, drove a BMW. His parents had gifted him for getting a C+ average, and had apparently been raised to believe that rules were suggestions for other people. I first encountered him when his music was rattling my windows at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I'd gone over, knocked politely, and asked if he could turn it down. Brandon had looked me up and down like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. "Dude, it's not even that late," he'd said, not moving to lower the volume. "Besides, my mom's the HOA president. We can do whatever we want." That phrase, "we can do whatever we want," I'd hear it a lot over the next few months. The thing about the Mitchell family was that they'd weaponized the HOA into their personal enforcement agency. Karen had been president for 3 years, and in that time she'd stacked the board with people who either owed her favors or were too intimidated to challenge her. Every meeting was a performance where Karen decided who was in compliance and who wasn't, based entirely on whether she liked you. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman 3 doors down, had been fined $200 because her garden gnomes violated the aesthetic standards outlined in Section 14.3 of the HOA bylaws. Never mind that those gnomes had been there for 15 years before Karen took power. When Mrs. Patterson tried to protest, Karen threatened daily inspections of her property until she found more violations. The Johnsons, a young couple with a newborn, got cited because their car, a 10-year-old Honda, was deemed unsightly and lowering property values. Karen had actually measured the car's parking position and found it was 3 inches over the designated spot line. 3 inches. The fine was $500. And Brandon was learning from the master. He parked his BMW across 2 spaces regularly. He threw parties that went until dawn. He'd borrowed Mr. Chen's lawnmower without asking and returned it broken, then denied ever touching it. When confronted, Karen would appear like a designer-clad dragon breathing fire about harassment of her family and threatening legal action. The neighborhood lived in fear. I watched it happen. People would see Karen coming and suddenly remember urgent errands. They'd agree to her absurd demands, repainting houses in approved colors, removing basketball hoops, taking down Christmas decorations exactly on January 2nd just to avoid becoming her next target. I tried to stay neutral, keep my head down. My job was demanding enough without neighborhood drama, but I noticed things. The way conversations stopped when Karen walked by. The exhaustion in people's faces when they talked about the latest HOA decree. The quiet resignation of a community that had surrendered to tyranny. I had a few more run-ins with Brandon over those months. He'd rev his engine at 6 in the morning deliberately, it seemed. He'd let his friends park in front of my driveway. Once I came home to find beer cans in my yard from a party that had spilled over from his place. Each time I stayed calm, documented it, made polite requests, but Brandon's attitude got worse. He could sense I wasn't afraid of his mother, and that seemed to enrage him. Most people in this neighborhood trembled at the Mitchell name. I didn't. That made me a problem. Karen tried different tactics with me. Surprise inspections where she'd show up with a clipboard searching for violations. Letters about my grass being a quarter-inch too long. Complaints about my truck, the vehicle I used for work, being commercial in nature and therefore banned under HOA rules. I complied when the rules were legitimate, ignored her when they weren't. And I never not once told her what I actually did for a living. That restraint would prove very valuable. By month 6, I'd seen enough. The Mitchells weren't just annoying, they were operating what amounted to a protection racket. Comply with Karen's whims or face endless harassment and fines. Let Brandon do whatever he wanted, or Karen would find a way to make your life miserable. What they didn't know was that I'd been collecting evidence the whole time. Photos, videos, documented incidents, witness statements that people gave me privately too afraid to speak publicly. I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. I was building a case. And then came that Saturday. That beautiful, peaceful Saturday when Brandon decided to escalate from nuisance to direct confrontation. When he stood at my pool, on my property, and ordered me to leave. That's when I knew it was time to stop being quiet. So there I was, still floating in my pool, looking up at this kid who genuinely believed he had authority over me. Brandon Mitchell stood there in his $200 sneakers, smirking like he'd just delivered a devastating blow. "I'm not leaving," I said calmly, taking another sip of my beer. "Because this is my property, my pool, my house." Brandon's smirk faltered for half a second before returning even stronger. "No, it's not. This whole section is HOA community property. My mom showed me the maps. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh that echoed across the water. "Son, I don't know what maps your mother showed you, but I've got the property deed that says otherwise. This is private property. You're trespassing." His face flushed red. Brandon wasn't used to people standing up to him, and certainly not with laughter. "You're lying." "My mom said." "Your mom is wrong," I interrupted, still maintaining that calm tone. Years of dealing with difficult people had taught me that staying cool was the best way to make someone lose theirs. "Now I'm going to ask you nicely one time. Please leave my property." "You can't tell me what to do." Brandon's voice cracked slightly, that teenage fury breaking through. "Do you know who my family is? We run this place." I paddled to the edge of the pool, set down my beer, and looked him straight in the eye. "I know exactly who your family is, and I'm still telling you to leave. Right now." For a moment I thought he might actually listen. His bravado wavered and something like uncertainty flickered across his face. But then his phone was out and he was jabbing at the screen with urgent fingers. "You're done," he hissed. "My mom is going to destroy you." "I'll wait," I said, settling back into the water. Karen arrived in less than 5 minutes, which told me she'd been close by, probably doing her weekend patrol of the neighborhood, looking for violations to cite. She came through my side gate like a hurricane in Lululemon, her face already set in that expression of righteous fury I'd seen her deploy on so many neighbors. "What is going on here?" she demanded, not to Brandon but to me, as if I was the problem. "Your son trespassed on my property and ordered me to leave my own pool," I explained, still floating, still calm. "I've asked him to leave. Now I'm asking you both to leave." Karen's eyes narrowed. She pulled out her phone, these people and their phones, and started scrolling through something. According to the HOA property maps, this area is designated as community recreational space. "You're actually the one trespassing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was doubling down on the lie. "Karen, you and I both know that's not true. I have the property deed, the survey, the permits. This is private property." It's been private property since the house was built. I don't care what fake documents you have, she snapped, her voice taking on that sharp edge that had cowed so many of our neighbors. The HOA owns this land. I have the documentation right here. She thrust her phone at me, showing what appeared to be some kind of property map. I didn't even need to look closely to know it was fabricated. The boundaries were wrong, the lot numbers didn't match, and most tellingly, it looked like it had been made in Microsoft Paint. That's not a legal document, I said. It's an official HOA record, Karen declared, as if saying it with enough conviction would make it true. And as president, I'm informing you that you're in violation of multiple bylaws. Unauthorized use of community property, harassment of community members. She gestured to Brandon, who was now recording this entire exchange on his phone, and failure to comply with HOA directives. Neighbors were starting to appear. I could see curtains moving, doors cracking open. Mrs. Patterson was on her porch wringing her hands. The Johnsons were watching from their window. Everyone wanted to see what was happening, but no one wanted to get involved. They'd learned that lesson already. The fines alone will be substantial. Karen continued, warming to her performance. I'm talking thousands of dollars. Plus, I'll be recommending to the board that we pursue legal action to have you removed from the community entirely. For using my own pool, I said flatly. For violating community standards and showing complete disregard for our rules. Brandon was grinning, now filming everything, probably already planning how he'd edit this for his social media. This is going viral, dude. Everyone's gonna see what happens when you mess with us. I looked at Karen, then at Brandon, then at the neighbors, watching from their houses, too afraid to speak up. This had gone on long enough. Not just today, but for months. Years, really. This whole neighborhood had been held hostage by these two, and everyone was too scared to do anything about it. Karen, I said, climbing out of the pool and reaching for my towel, I'm going to give you one last chance. Take your son and leave my property. Now, she laughed. Actually laughed. Or what you'll call the police. Please do. I'd love to explain to them how you're illegally occupying community property and threatening HOA leadership. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm asking you to leave. We're not going anywhere. Brandon chimed in, still recording. This is our neighborhood. You're nobody. Karen nodded, crossing her arms. That's right. You moved here 6 months ago thinking you could ignore our rules, avoid our fees, do whatever you want. Well, that's not how Willowbrook Estates works. We have standards. We have order. And people who don't comply face consequences. Consequences, I repeated. Serious consequences, Karen emphasized. I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting for Monday night. We're going to discuss your multiple violations and what actions need to be taken. I suggest you attend, though frankly the decision is already made. She turned to leave Brandon, following her, still filming me, standing there in my swim trunks, dripping water on my own patio. Oh, and one more thing, Karen called over her shoulder. That truck of yours, the one you park in your driveway, I'm having it towed tomorrow. Commercial vehicles are strictly prohibited, and I've been far too lenient with you already. They walked away, Brandon's laughter echoing back to me. I stood there watching them go, watching my neighbors quickly disappear back into their houses, not wanting to be seen associating with Karen's latest target. I looked down at my phone, sitting safely in a waterproof case on my patio table. Its recording light was still blinking. I'd captured everything. Consequences, I muttered to myself, a smile slowly spreading across my face. Yeah, Karen, let's talk about consequences. That evening, after Karen and Brandon left, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door. She was 72, lived alone since her husband died, and I'd watched her shrink into herself every time Karen drove past. Now she stood on my porch, trembling slightly, holding a casserole dish like a shield. I saw what happened, she said quietly. May I come in? Over the next 2 hours, Mrs. Patterson told me everything. Not just about her own experiences, but about the entire neighborhood's 3-year nightmare under Karen's rule. The garden gnome incident I'd heard about, that was just the beginning. Karen had fined Mrs. Patterson repeatedly for various violations. Her mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Her doormat was 2 inches too large. Her porch light was too bright. The fines totaled over $3,000. Mrs. Patterson was living on Social Security. Those fines had forced her to skip medications. I thought about moving, she said, tears welling up. But I've lived here for 30 years. My husband and I raised our children here. Why should I be driven out by that woman? You shouldn't, I said firmly. But what can I do? She controls everything. The board just does whatever she says. I tried to fight one fine and she tripled it, said I was disrespecting HOA authority. After Mrs. Patterson left, I couldn't sleep. I sat up reviewing everything I'd documented about the Mitchells and I realized this was bigger than just annoying neighbors. This was systematic harassment, possibly fraud, definitely abuse of power. Sunday morning, Tom Johnson stopped me while I was getting my newspaper. "Hey, I heard about yesterday," he said, glancing around nervously like Karen might materialize from thin air. "Listen, man, just be careful. The Mitchells, they're vindictive. When we first moved in, our car got keyed 3 times in 2 weeks. We couldn't prove it was Brandon, but it stopped after we paid a fine to Karen." "That's extortion," I said. Tom shrugged helplessly. "Probably. But what are we going to do? We've got a baby, a mortgage. We can't afford legal fees to fight the HOA, and Karen knows that. She targets people who can't fight back." Over the next few days, more neighbors came forward, speaking in hushed voices, always checking over their shoulders. Each had a story. The Chens told me about how Brandon had borrowed their lawnmower, broken it, then Karen had cited them for having an improperly maintained lawn. When they explained their mower was broken by her son, she'd threatened them with daily inspections. The Rodriguezes described how their teenage daughter had rejected Brandon's advances at school. The next week, their house was egged. Security footage clearly showed Brandon's BMW, but when they went to Karen, she'd threatened to sue them for defamation. Marcus Webb, a single father of 2, told me about coming home to find his fence vandalized with spray paint. Karen had immediately fined him for the eyesore and demanded he repaint it within 48 hours at his expense. He'd seen Brandon and his friends laughing in their yard that night, but had no way to prove it. "She's untouchable," Marcus said bitterly. "Her brother-in-law is a lawyer who sends threatening letters to anyone who challenges her. Her husband donates to local politicians. She's got connections everywhere." I listened to all of it, documented all of it, and felt my anger growing into something cold and focused. The week after the pool incident, Brandon escalated. Monday evening, I came home to find him and 3 friends in my backyard peering through my fence at the pool. "Can I help you?" I called out. "Just checking out the community property," Brandon sneered, "making sure everything's up to code." Tuesday, he drove past my house at least a dozen times, revving his engine, laying on the horn. When I was trying to work from home, the noise was constant. I called him, asked him politely to stop. He laughed and hung up. Wednesday, I found trash dumped on my lawn. Fast food bags, soda cups, cigarette butts. My security camera caught Brandon's BMW driving away at 3 in the morning. Thursday, someone I had a pretty good guess who slashed 2 of my truck tires while I was at work. Every incident I documented, photos, videos, timestamps. I was building something bigger than just a defense against HOA harassment, but I needed more. I needed the final piece that would make this case undeniable. Friday, I had to work late. A major situation required my attention, and I didn't get home until almost midnight. That's when I saw it. My pool area looked like a war zone. Beer bottles floated in the water. Pizza boxes were scattered across the deck. Someone had vomited in my flower beds. My patio furniture was overturned, and my expensive grill had been pushed into the pool. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, my neighbors had watched it happen and done nothing. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson said when I knocked on her door, barely containing my fury. They showed up around 6. Brandon and at least 20 kids. They were so loud, so destructive. I called Karen, but she just laughed and said boys will be boys. I wanted to call the police, but what? She looked down. Karen told everyone that if anyone called the police on her son, she'd make our lives hell. She'd find violations for everyone who dared. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I stood there on Mrs. Patterson's porch looking at this elderly woman who'd been terrorized into helplessness, and something in me snapped. Not in anger, in clarity. These people needed someone who couldn't be threatened. Someone who couldn't be bullied or intimidated. Someone with actual authority that superseded Karen's manufactured power. "Mrs. Patterson," I said calmly, "how would you feel about testifying to what you just told me? I couldn't." "Karen would. What if I told you that Karen can't touch you, that none of her threats mean anything? How could you possibly guarantee that?" I smiled. "Because on Monday night at that emergency HOA meeting, Karen called, 'I'm going to introduce myself properly.' And trust me, she's not going to like it. Saturday morning I filed formal reports. Not with the HOA, with my own office. Trespassing, vandalism, harassment, destruction of property. I documented every incident, every witness statement, every piece of evidence I'd collected over 6 months. And then I made some calls. To the county attorney's office, to the state HOA regulatory board, to a few colleagues who specialized in civil rights violations. By Sunday night, I had everything I needed. The trap was set. Karen had called an emergency meeting to crucify me. She had no idea she'd actually called her own trial. Monday couldn't come fast enough. Monday evening arrived with the kind of tension you could cut with a knife. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock at the community center, and by 6:30 the parking lot was already full. Karen had done her job well. Flyers had appeared in every mailbox over the weekend. Emails had gone out to the entire neighborhood, and social media posts had painted me as some kind of dangerous renegade threatening the safety and property values of Willowbrook Estates. I arrived exactly at 7 wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Nothing fancy, nothing that would give away what was coming. I carried a leather folder under my arm containing documents that would change everything, but to anyone watching, I just looked like a slightly nervous homeowner about to face judgment. The community center was packed. Every chair was filled, people lined the walls, and I could feel dozens of eyes on me as I walked in. The energy in the room was electric, not supportive, but hungry. Karen had turned this into entertainment, a public execution where the neighborhood could watch someone get destroyed for daring to challenge her authority. Karen sat at the head table with 4 other board members, all of whom looked distinctly uncomfortable. She dressed for the occasion in a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Her hair perfectly styled, her makeup camera ready. Brandon sat in the front row, smirking, his phone already out and recording. "Good, you decided to show up," Karen announced as I entered, her voice carrying across the room. "We can begin." She stood, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Karen began, her voice dripping with false concern. "I've called this emergency meeting because we have a serious situation that threatens the safety, security, and integrity of our community. As you all know, we have very specific rules and regulations designed to protect property values and maintain the standard of living we all expect in Willowbrook Estates." She clicked a button and a projector screen lit up with a photo of my house, then my truck, then me caught on someone's camera standing by my pool. "This man," she continued, pointing at me, like I was evidence in a criminal trial, "moved into our community 6 months ago and has shown nothing but contempt for our rules. He parks commercial vehicles in violation of Section 4.2. He refuses to maintain his property to community standards. He's been hostile to community leadership, and most seriously, he has been illegally occupying HOA common property." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Mrs. Patterson in the back looking terrified. The Johnsons were there, Tom's jaw clenched. Marcus Webb stood by the door, arms crossed, watching carefully. "Last Saturday," Karen's voice rose dramatically, "this man verbally assaulted my minor son when Brandon politely asked him to vacate community property. He became aggressive, threatening, and showed complete disregard for HOA authority." She clicked again. Now it was screenshots from Brandon's phone video, carefully edited, of course. Clips of me saying, "I'm telling you to leave," without the context. Me climbing out of the pool, looking vaguely threatening. My face in a moment that could be interpreted as angry. "My son felt genuinely unsafe," Karen continued, placing a protective hand on Brandon's shoulder, "and that's when I knew we had to act. We cannot have someone in our community who threatens children, who occupies property that doesn't belong to him, and who shows such blatant disrespect for the rules we all agreed to follow." The board members nodded in unison, like bobbleheads programmed to agree with everything Karen said. "I'd like to call Brandon Mitchell to speak about his experience," Karen announced. Brandon stood up, playing the role of traumatized victim perfectly. "Yeah, so I was just walking through the neighborhood on Saturday, right? And I saw this guy in the pool by Oak Street. I know that's community property because my mom showed me the maps. So I politely, and I was super polite, I asked him if he knew this was HOA property. He paused for effect, looking around the room. He got really aggressive, like immediately. Started yelling at me, telling me to get lost, using language I probably shouldn't repeat. I felt threatened, so I called my mom. When she got there and tried to calmly explain the situation, he got even worse. He actually threatened to call the police on us. When he's the one trespassing, I had to admire the performance. The kid had learned from the best. Half-truths, mixed with complete fabrications, delivered with enough conviction that people who didn't know better might actually believe it. "Thank you, Brandon," Karen said, giving him a comforting pat. "I know that was difficult to relive." She turned back to the crowd. "Since that incident, this man has continued to harass my family. He's made threatening phone calls. He's been surveilling our home. My son is afraid to walk through his own neighborhood." More murmurs. I could see some neighbors actually nodding along, buying into the narrative. "The board and I have discussed this extensively," Karen continued, "and we've determined that this level of violation cannot be tolerated. I'm recommending immediate action fines totaling $15,000 for multiple violations, immediate removal of the commercial vehicle, and if compliance is not achieved within 30 days, legal action to force sale of the 5 property and removal from the community. $15,000. She'd actually said it. The room erupted in whispers. "This isn't about being vindictive," Karen said, her voice taking on a tone of false reasonableness. "This is about protecting all of you. If we let one person ignore our rules, harass our families, and occupy property illegally, what's next? Where does it end? We have standards for a reason." She looked directly at me, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "This man has shown he has no respect for authority, no respect for rules, and no respect for this community. He needs to go." The room was silent. This was the moment she'd been building toward. The public humiliation. The total victory. "Does the accused have anything to say in his defense?" Karen asked, making it sound like even allowing me to speak was an act of tremendous generosity. I stood up slowly, picking up my folder. Every eye in the room was on me. Karen's smile was victorious. Brandon was recording, probably already planning the viral video title, "Karen Destroys Rule-Breaking Neighbor at HOA Meeting." "Actually," I said calmly, "I do have a few things to say." "Make it quick," Karen snapped. "We've heard enough." I walked to the front of the room, and Karen reluctantly stepped aside, clearly annoyed that I was taking up space at her tribunal. "First," I said, opening my folder and pulling out a document, "let's address the property issue. Karen claims I'm occupying HOA common property. That's interesting because here's my property deed properly registered with the county showing that the house at 742 Oak Street and all surrounding land, including the pool, is private property. Always has been." I held it up so everyone could see the official seal. "Here's the survey from when the house was built. Here's the plot map from the county registrar. And here," I pulled out another document, "is a letter from the county zoning office confirming that no part of 742 Oak Street has ever been designated as HOA common property." Karen's smile faltered. "Those could be forged." "They're not," I interrupted calmly. "They're official county records, available to anyone who wants to verify them." I moved to the next document in my folder. "Now let's talk about harassment. Karen claims I've been threatening her family, making harassing phone calls, surveilling their home. That's a serious accusation." I pulled out my phone records. "Here are my phone logs for the past 6 months. You'll see I called Brandon exactly once last Tuesday at 2:47 p.m. to politely ask him to stop honking his horn repeatedly in front of my house. The call lasted 43 seconds. He hung up on me. I looked at Karen. "Would you like me to play the recording?" Her face went pale. "You recorded a phone call with my son without permission. Actually, in this state, one-party consent is legal for recording, but that's not the point. The point is, one polite phone call doesn't constitute harassment." I set the phone logs on the table. "As for surveilling your home, I haven't been anywhere near your property. What I have been doing is recording activity on my own property." Which brings me to Friday night. I pulled out a tablet and queued up the security footage. This is my property, my cameras. Friday evening around 6:15 p.m., I hit play. The large screen showed crystal clear footage of Brandon's BMW pulling up to my house. Then Brandon and about 20 teenagers piling out, jumping my fence, and proceeding to throw a party in my pool area. The timestamp was clear, the faces were clear, everything was clear. The room went dead silent as we watched Brandon and his friends trash my property. You could hear the bottles breaking, the furniture being thrown around, someone yelling about pushing the grill into the pool. This lasted for approximately 4 hours, I said, letting the footage play. Trespassing, vandalism, destruction of property. There's also underage drinking, but we'll get to that. Karen's face had gone from pale to red. That's taken out of context. There's 6 hours of footage, Karen. Would you like me to play all of it? Brandon had stopped recording. He was staring at the screen, finally realizing that his pranks had been documented in perfect high definition. But that's not all, I continued, pulling out more documents. Let's talk about the pattern of behavior. Monday night, trash dumped on my lawn. Tuesday, constant harassment with car horns. Wednesday, more trash. Thursday, my truck tires slashed. I showed the footage for each incident. Brandon's BMW was visible in every single one. Now here's where it gets interesting, I said, my voice still calm, still measured. I started documenting everything about 6 months ago. Not just incidents involving me, but incidents involving other residents. I looked around the room. "Mrs. Patterson, would you like to tell everyone about your garden gnomes?" Mrs. Patterson stood up, trembling but determined. "Karen fined me $200 because she said they violated aesthetic standards. But those gnomes had been there for 15 years before she became president. And the Johnsons," I continued, Tom, Sarah, tell everyone about your car. Tom stood. We got fined $500 because our Honda was supposedly 3 inches over the parking line. Karen measured it herself. Marcus Webb, your fence. Marcus stepped forward. Someone spray painted it. I have security footage showing Brandon's car that night. But when I reported it, Karen fined me for having a vandalized fence and told me I had to fix it immediately at my own expense. One by one, neighbors began standing up. People who'd been silent for years, terrified of Karen's power, suddenly found their voices. She fined me for having the wrong color mailbox. She threatened to inspect my house daily until she found violations. My daughter rejected Brandon at school, and our house got egged. She threatened legal action when I questioned an assessment. Karen was shaking her head frantically. This is coordinated slander. You're all lying. Actually, I said they're all telling the truth, and I can prove it. Because you see, Karen, I haven't just been your neighbor for the past 6 months. I've been investigating you. The room went silent again. Karen's eyes narrowed. Investigating who do you think you are? This was it. The moment I'd been building toward. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge. The gold shield caught the light as I held it up for everyone to see. I'm Sheriff Michael Reeves, elected sheriff of this county. And Karen, you and your son are in a lot of trouble. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Gasps echoed through the room. Karen's face went from red to white in an instant. Brandon dropped his phone. The board members looked like they wanted to melt into their chairs. That's not possible, Karen stammered. You said you worked in public service. I do. I serve the public as their elected sheriff. I moved here 6 months ago when I took office, and I deliberately kept my profession quiet because I wanted to integrate normally into the community. I wanted to be a neighbor, not a badge. I set my shield on the table, but you made that impossible. I pulled out another folder, this one much thicker. For the past 6 months, I've been documenting everything, every HOA violation you've fabricated, every fine you've assessed without proper authority, every threat you've made to intimidate residents, every instance of your son's criminal behavior that you've covered up. Karen tried to regain her footing. You can't. This is entrapment. You deliberately. Entrapment requires inducement to commit a crime. I didn't make your son trespass, vandalize property, or engage in underage drinking. I didn't make you abuse your HOA position, file false reports, or threaten residents. You both did that all on your own. I just documented it. I turned to the board members. Did any of you know that Karen has been misappropriating HOA funds? That she's been pocketing assessment fees and falsifying financial records? The board members looked shocked. That's not. We never one of them started. Here are the financial records, I said, sliding documents across the table. Official HOA accounts versus Karen's personal banking records. Notice the correlation between special assessments and deposits to her personal account. That's embezzlement. That's fraud. Karen was standing now, her hands gripping the table. You have no right to access my financial records. I had probable cause and a warrant. Everything was done legally, unlike pretty much everything you've done for the past 3 years. I turned to face the entire room. Here's what's going to happen. Brandon is going to be charged with criminal trespass, vandalism, destruction of property, and contributing to delinquency of minors. Karen is going to be investigated for fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. The HOA's financial records are going to be audited by the State Regulatory Board. You can't do this, Karen shrieked. My brother-in-law is a lawyer. We'll sue you for everything. Go ahead, I said calmly. I welcome it. Discovery should be fascinating. Brandon suddenly stood up. This is bullshit. You think you're so tough. You think your little badge scares me. He took a step toward me, his fists clenched. My family owns this neighborhood. We own you, Brandon, I said quietly. I strongly suggest you sit down and remain quiet. Or what he was in my face, now chest puffed out teenage bravado mixed with genuine panic. You gonna arrest me? For what? Having a party? Give me a break, old man. Then he made his final mistake. He put his hand on my chest and shoved me. The moment Brandon's hand made contact with my chest, the entire room seemed to freeze. That single shove, witnessed by over 100 people, just sealed his fate. Brandon Mitchell, I said calmly, pulling handcuffs from my belt, you're under arrest for assault on a law enforcement officer, criminal trespass, vandalism, destruction of property, and contributing to the delinquency of minors. What? No, Brandon backed up, his bravado evaporating. I barely touched you. That's not assault. Any unwanted physical contact with an officer is assault. Congratulations, you just upgraded your charges. I keyed my radio. Dispatch, this is Sheriff Reeves. I need 2 units at the Willowbrook Estates Community Center. Suspect in custody. Don't you dare, Karen screamed, launching herself between me and her son. You leave him alone. This is abuse of power. This is, ma'am, step back, I said firmly. You're interfering with an arrest. I don't care. You're not taking my son. The community center doors opened and 2 of my deputies walked in. I'd had them on standby, parked 2 blocks away just in case things went exactly like this. Deputy Martinez and Deputy Chen, both professional, both ready. Deputies, please escort Mrs. Mitchell away from the suspect, I instructed. Karen fought as they gently but firmly moved her aside. This is harassment. Discrimination. I'll have all of your jobs. Do you know who my family is? Do you know what connections we have? Brandon tried to run. He actually bolted for the side door, but Deputy Martinez was faster. Within seconds, Brandon was in handcuffs reading him his rights while the teenager alternated between cursing and crying. You have the right to remain silent, Martinez began. This is so unfair, Brandon sobbed. I didn't do anything. It was just a party. It was just a joke. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Karen's meltdown was spectacular. She collapsed into a chair, then immediately jumped up again, pointing at me with a shaking finger. I'll destroy you. My brother-in-law will sue you into oblivion. You'll lose your job, your house, everything. Your brother-in-law is a tax attorney in Denver, I said calmly. I checked. He specializes in corporate tax law. Criminal defense isn't exactly his forte. One of the board members, Gerald Hutchins, who'd been Karen's loyal supporter, suddenly stood up. Karen, I think we need to have a separate board discussion. Without you present, Karen whirled on him. Excuse me, if what the sheriff is saying is true, if you've been misappropriating funds, the board needs to address this immediately. You spineless coward, Karen hissed. I made you. Without me, you'd be nothing in this community. You threatened my wife last month, Gerald said quietly. Told her you'd cite us for violations if I didn't vote your way on the fence height amendment. I went along with it because I was scared. I'm done being scared. Another board member stood. She told me she'd make sure my home insurance found out about renovations I'd done without permits if I didn't support her assessment increases. Then another. She's been doctoring the financial reports. I questioned a discrepancy once and she threatened to have my business clients informed about some made-up violations. The dam had broken. Years of intimidation, threats, and fear were spilling out. Karen looked around wildly, realizing that her empire was collapsing in real time. You're all traitors. After everything I've done for this community, you've done nothing but terrorize us, Mrs. Patterson said, standing up with more strength in her voice than I'd ever heard. For 3 years, you've bullied us, threatened us, stolen from us. Well, it's over, Karen. We're done. The community center erupted in agreement. People were standing, voices overlapping, sharing their stories of Karen's abuse. The fear that had kept them silent for years was transforming into anger, into relief, into solidarity. Deputy Chen escorted Brandon out, the teenager's head hanging low, his mother screaming after him. Don't say anything, don't talk to them, we'll get a lawyer. Ma'am, you need to calm down, Deputy Martinez said. Don't tell me to calm down. Do you know who I am? Yes, ma'am. You're someone who's about to be arrested for obstruction if you don't step back. Karen finally seemed to realize the gravity of her situation. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. You can't prove any of this financial stuff. Those records could be from anywhere. They're from your bank. Obtained with a warrant, based on probable cause. Your signatures are on the withdrawal slips. Your fingerprints are on the falsified reports. Karen, you left a trail a mile wide because you never thought anyone would look. This is a witch hunt, she said, but her voice had lost its strength. No, I corrected. This is accountability. Something you've never experienced. Gerald stood up officially. I'm calling for an emergency vote. All in favor of immediately removing Karen Mitchell as HOA president. Every hand in the room went up. Every single one. Motion passes unanimously, Gerald said. Karen, you're removed from office effective immediately. We'll be conducting a full audit and cooperating completely with law enforcement. Karen stood there, her perfect hair slightly disheveled, her power suit no longer looking quite so authoritative. 3 years of tyranny had ended in less than an hour. This isn't over, she said, but it sounded hollow. Actually, I said it is. Deputies, please escort Mrs. Mitchell out. As they led her toward the door, she turned back one last time. I'll sue all of you, the HOA, the sheriff's department, everyone in this room. You're welcome to try, I called after her. Discovery should be interesting. After she was gone, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then Tom Johnson started clapping, then Mrs. Patterson, then Marcus Webb. Soon the entire community center was erupting in applause. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson, said, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for standing up for us. You all stood up for yourselves, I said. I just gave you the opportunity. Gerald approached me. Sheriff, the board would like to formally apologize. We should have stopped her years ago. We were cowards. You were victims, I corrected. There's a difference. But now you have a chance to make this right. To build an HOA that actually serves the community instead of terrorizing it. We will, Gerald promised. First thing tomorrow, we're scheduling a full community meeting. Real transparency this time. New elections, new bylaws, everything. Over the next hour, neighbors approached me with additional evidence, additional stories. The prosecutor's office was going to have a field day with this case. As I was packing up my documents, Marcus Webb approached. "Sheriff, I have to ask, why did you wait? You could have shut this down months ago." "I could have," I admitted, "but I needed to build an airtight case." One incident Karen could have explained away. A pattern spanning months, witnessed by dozens of people, documented with overwhelming evidence. That's undeniable. I wanted to make sure that when justice came, it stuck. He nodded slowly. Well, it stuck. 3 weeks after that memorable HOA meeting, I stood in the county courthouse watching Brandon Mitchell learn about consequences for the first time in his 17 years. The judge was not sympathetic. "Mr. Mitchell, you've shown a pattern of behavior that suggests you believe yourself above the law. Trespassing, vandalism, destruction of property, assault on a law enforcement officer, these aren't pranks. These are crimes with real victims and real consequences." Brandon stood there in a suit his mother had probably bought specifically for court, looking smaller somehow. The arrogance was gone. Reality had finally caught up with him. "I'm sentencing you to 200 hours of community service, 18 months probation, and full restitution to Sheriff Reeves for damages to his property. That comes to approximately $12,000. You'll also be required to attend counseling and complete an anger management program." Karen sat in the gallery, her face a mask of controlled fury. She'd shown up with her brother-in-law, the tax attorney, who'd wisely recommended she not speak. Every word out of her mouth for the past 3 weeks had only made things worse. Brandon's criminal case was just the beginning. The state HOA regulatory board had launched a full investigation into Karen's management. The audit revealed over $40,000 in misappropriated funds over 3 years, fake fines that went into her pocket, assessment increases that were never properly voted on, vendor contracts awarded to companies that didn't exist but had bank accounts in her name. The civil suits started rolling in within days. Mrs. Patterson sued for the $3,000 in fraudulent fines plus damages for emotional distress. The Johnsons filed, the Chens filed, Marcus Webb filed. Eventually, 17 families joined a class action lawsuit against Karen Mitchell personally and the old HOA board for negligence. Here's where it got interesting. Remember how Karen used to brag about her connections? Turns out one of the neighbors she'd terrorized, David Rodriguez, was an attorney specializing in civil rights and HOA abuse cases. He'd moved to Willowbrook Estates specifically to get away from work stress, only to find himself living under Karen's thumb. Now he was representing every single victim pro bono. "I've been documenting her behavior for 2 years, David told me over coffee one morning. "I was building my own case, but I was waiting for the right moment. When you revealed yourself at that meeting, I knew the time had come. Between your evidence and mine, Karen doesn't stand a chance." The Mitchell house went up for sale 6 weeks after the meeting. A quiet, almost shameful listing. No open house, no HOA-approved signage. They were leaving before the civil cases went to trial, though that wouldn't stop the judgments from following them. I saw Karen once more before they left. She was loading boxes into a moving truck, and our eyes met across the street. For a moment, I thought she might say something. An apology maybe, or one last threat, but she just looked away and kept loading boxes. Brandon I saw at his first day of community service. He'd been assigned to help with neighborhood cleanup, picking up trash, pulling weeds, basic maintenance. The kid who'd once ordered people around like servants was now serving the community he'd terrorized. He approached me during his lunch break, hesitant. "Sheriff Reeves, Brandon, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. The pool, the vandalism, all of it. I studied him." The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might actually be genuine remorse. "You're sorry you got caught, or sorry you did it." He thought about that, both honestly, but more the second one now. I didn't realize how much damage we were doing. My mom always made it seem like we were just maintaining standards, teaching people lessons. I didn't see it as bullying. That's exactly what it was, though. I know that now. He looked down at his orange safety vest. "This sucks, but I guess I deserve it." "You do," I agreed. "But here's the thing about consequences, Brandon. They're meant to teach you something. You're 17. You've got your whole life ahead of you. The question is, what kind of person are you going to be?" He nodded slowly and went back to picking up trash. Meanwhile, Willowbrook Estates was transforming. The new HOA board, elected in a legitimate, transparent election, immediately rescinded dozens of Karen's ridiculous rules. Garden gnomes were suddenly legal again. Mrs. Patterson's gnomes returned to their posts like tiny victorious soldiers. Reasonable parking regulations replaced Karen's petty restrictions. The approved color lists were scrapped. The excessive fines were eliminated. The HOA became what it was supposed to be, a community organization that maintained common areas and facilitated neighborhood cooperation, not an enforcement agency for one person's ego. Gerald Hutchins, now serving as president, approached me about hosting a community pool day. "Your pool, obviously," he said, "completely voluntary. We thought it might be a nice way to bring everyone together. Show that we're actually a community now." I agreed immediately. That first pool day was magical. Kids splashing in the water where Brandon had once demanded I leave. Mrs. Patterson bringing her famous potato salad, the Johnson's baby taking his first swimming lesson, Marcus Webb manning the grill, my grill which had been fished out, cleaned, and repaired. People weren't watching nervously for Karen to appear. They weren't worried about violations or fines. They were just being neighbors, being friends. Tom Johnson approached me with a beer. "You know, I've been thinking about what you did, keeping your job secret, I mean. Part of me wishes you'd told us from the start. We could have ended this years ago." "I've thought about that too," I admitted. "Maybe I should have. But I also think sometimes you have to let people get comfortable being themselves. If I'd led with the badge, Karen might have been more careful. We might never have gathered enough evidence to really stop her. Silver lining to your secret identity, huh? Something like that." That evening, as the sun set and neighbors lingered by the pool, now half empty but still full of laughter, I realized something. This was why I'd become a sheriff. Not for the authority, not for the power, but for moments like this. For the chance to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. For the opportunity to stand between bullies and their victims. Karen and Brandon had believed their own mythology. They'd convinced themselves that power meant being feared, that authority meant being obeyed without question. They'd never understood that real strength comes from lifting people up, not pushing them down. The video Brandon had recorded that day at my pool, the one he'd planned to use as evidence of my aggression, did go viral, but not the way he'd intended. The unedited version, showing him trespassing and making demands, became a cautionary tale about entitled behavior. Comments poured in, "This is what's wrong with HOA culture. That kid got what he deserved. Thank God for that, Sheriff." Justice, I reflected, has a funny way of finding balance. You can push people down for only so long before they push back. You can abuse power only until someone with real power notices. You can rule through fear until someone fearless comes along. 6 months after that chaotic HOA meeting, Willowbrook Estates was genuinely thriving. Property values had actually increased because people wanted to live in a community known for standing up to tyranny. The HOA budget was transparent and published quarterly. Board meetings were collaborative instead of dictatorial. And me, I was just another neighbor. The sheriff thing was known now, obviously, but people treated me normally. They waved when I mowed my lawn. They borrowed my tools and returned them. They invited me to barbecues not because I was the sheriff, but because I was part of the community. That's all I'd ever wanted. You know what I learned from all of this. Bullies, whether they're in a schoolyard or running an HOA, survive on one thing: silence. They count on good people being too afraid, too tired, or too intimidated to stand up. Karen and Brandon ruled Willowbrook Estates for 3 years, not because they were powerful, but because everyone else felt powerless. The moment people found their voices, the tyranny ended. Here's the lesson I want you to take from this. You don't need a badge to stand up for what's right. You don't need authority to refuse to be bullied. What you need is courage. The courage to document abuse, to speak truth, to stand with others who are suffering. Change doesn't happen because one hero rides in and saves the day. It happens because ordinary people decide they've had enough. If you're living under someone's thumb, an HOA tyrant, a workplace bully, anyone who's using power to hurt instead of help, know this: their power is an illusion. It exists only as long as you believe in it. The moment you stop being afraid, the moment you stand up and say no more, everything changes. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or someone who abused their power? How did you handle it? And if stories like this remind you that justice is possible, hit that subscribe button. Because standing up to bullies, that's a story worth sharing. Remember, karma doesn't always arrive on schedule, but it always arrives. And when it does, it's absolutely beautiful to watch.